right. Well, it is 7:01, so we will officially get started. As folks join us, we will certainly welcome them. But we want to start by thanking everybody so much for taking the time to joining us tonight. We're so excited for another edition of Landmark Learns, where we get to talk about executive function at work and what this means and what this looks like. And obviously, we're all connected by Landmark School, right? We're all connected by this idea of supporting students who learn differently. And we also all know that we don't stop learning differently and processing information differently just because we graduate high school. We take those very strengths and sometimes those kind of struggles and those adaptations with us into the workplace. So we're super excited tonight to have a whole panel of folks that I'll get to in just a moment to talk about their experiences as individuals with dyslexia, individuals who think and process information differently, and what that means as an asset to them in the workplace. And then also, what are the things and the tools and the supports that they use in order to find success? So again, so excited to have you. And a couple quick housekeeping matters. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try to monitor that throughout the evening. If we are able, if a question comes up, we'll try to address it during the conversation. And if not, we'll have time at the end where we can get to that. So feel free to put those questions into the chat. All right, so my name's Josh. So glad to have you. I'm the head of school here at Landmark. This is my third academic year, and I am also, like all of our panelists, made by dyslexia, right? So I am also somebody who's constantly navigating what it means to, navigate work and the demands and the opportunities that brings as somebody who learns and processes information differently, as certainly my assistant Dina will tell you every day. That's the true story to my success is Dina, who keeps me in line. But again, so excited to have you, so excited for our panelists. I'll introduce them in just a moment. For those of you who may not be familiar with Landmark, we are a 2nd through 12th grade day and boarding school just north of Boston, where we specialize in serving and celebrating and bringing the best out of individuals, young people with dyslexia and language-based learning differences. So in addition to our school year program, which is obviously happening right now, we also have a summer program where we have folks come both to our elementary middle school campus and to our high school campus during the summer program to receive skills in executive functioning, in remediation, and around language and reading, writing, all these things. So if you have any interest, if you're not familiar with us, check us out at landmarkschool.org and learn all about us. In addition to Landmark and our school program, we're very fortunate and very thankful that we have Landmark Outreach, which I'll talk more about in a second. But Landmark School is for students and families and advocates and ed consultants and those that are interested in directly serving those individuals with dyslexia and related language-based learning differences. Landmark Outreach are for those who serve those who have LBLD. So we're talking about teachers, educators, schools, districts, even universities, and we have a whole suite of opportunities and professional development offerings that we have for those folks. So in addition to our Landmark Learns webinars, which you're a part of tonight, Landmark Outreach also has a series of free webinars where we bring in both experts from Landmark and researchers in the field that we partner with to talk about different topics and different things about, again, how we can serve individuals who learn differently in a school setting. So definitely check that out. Really great information that in addition to blogs, and then online offerings, online courses, and other things. So we also have a couple of other Landmark Learns opportunities coming up. So every year we try to pick a theme for our Landmark Learns. And this year, as you probably know, because you're here tonight, it's all about executive functioning. So earlier in this academic year, we had a webinar where we talked about what is executive functioning? What does this mean? And we'll talk briefly about that in a moment. And then coming up after tonight, we're also going to talk about executive functioning at home. You as a parent, how can we support students who might need that kind of scaffolding and support? What does that look like at home? And then what does that look like at school? We'll certainly talk about the kinds of things we do at Landmark, but also what can be translated to all kinds of environments. It's not just about the things that we do here, but what are the kind of the tenets and the principles that we use that again could be universal in all kinds of educational settings. So hope you will tune into those as they come up. And you'll certainly have, since you've registered for tonight's, we'll certainly send you emails and reminders about those things coming up. All right, quick logistical items. We are recording all this. So if obviously you're welcome to take notes, but you will, as someone who's registered for this, we'll send you a recording of this, and we'll also send you some of the resources that are referenced throughout it. So feel free to take notes, but we're certainly going to follow up with you. Like I mentioned, feel free to put questions in the comment section, and we'll make sure that we try to get to them throughout this evening. And then you can turn on closed captioning by clicking on the CC or live transcript button, which I didn't even know. So look at that. You can use that. So again, glad to have you. So a couple quick things to get us started. Again, we did a whole webinar just a few weeks ago on what is executive function. And you can go back, that's available on our website where you can watch that. But essentially, when we're talking about executive function, it's the ability to get stuff done. It's recognizing what needs to be done and then figuring out how to regulate different parts of your brain in order to accomplish that. And it can be something as simple as your morning routine. So I know I need to get up, I need to brush my teeth, I need to wash my face and get dressed, to I have this, kind of multi-pronged project that I have to turn into my boss 1 month from now. And there's about 35 different people that have to contribute to it. And I have to coordinate and do all these things. That's also, right, an executive function task, right? So it's from the most simple day-to-day things to the more complex things that we see in work. All of that, right, is about getting things done. In order to do that, there's these, kind of three main areas within executive function. Working memory is our ability to take information, hold on to it, and then do something with it, right? So, and I mean, not like a long history book, but again, that idea of I wake up, what do I need to do this morning? That's right, I need to brush my teeth, but the toothpaste up here, I'm out of it, so I need to go downstairs, get the toothpaste from the downstairs bathroom, bring it up, da da da. That's all working memory, right? And then inhibitory control, right? That's a really fancy way of saying controlling your impulses, right? What are the things that we need to do in order to get through a task, from kind of making sure we stay attuned to what's in front of us and not being distracted, to also kind of going through our own mental and emotional regulation to maybe not tell our boss the very thing we want to say out loud as they're telling us, what we need to be doing better or what comes next, right? That's all part of this inhibitory control. And then cognitive flexibility, right? This ability, we see this in schools a lot too, right? I think my day is going to look like this. And then I sit down and I found out I failed my test. How can I get through the rest of this day, right? How can I kind of flex with this? Or I thought we were going to start with first period, but there's an assembly, so we're starting with third. What does that mean? Or, as many of us experience on a day-to-day basis, I walk in and planning on my day looking like this, and by the end of the day, it looked like that. That's all cognitive flexibility, right? Our ability to roll with those things and adjust. So that's a very poor overview of executive function. Again, go watch that webinar, but it gives you a general sense of how this umbrella term, right, applies. And so now the most important part, the most exciting part, is we're going to get to our panel discussion. So we have four amazing folks with us today, all of whom have a connection to Landmark. Three of them actually graduated from Landmark. And then one is a former Landmark employee. All of them, as they'll share with you more in a moment, are individuals who learn differently, who process differently, and are also finding success in their careers and navigating this kind of brave new world. So the way I thought we'd start is we're going to briefly, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves. And if you don't mind, panelists, what we'll do is I'd love for you to tell me a little bit more about you, your connection to Landmark, your connection to kind of this topic tonight. And then what does executive function look like for you at the workplace? What are some strengths you might think you bring to this field? And then what are some areas where, this is kind of the things that I run into? And then we'll kind of dive in from there. So if we can, we'll start with Alanna, and then we'll go to Brittany, and then Spencer, and then Addie. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see you guys full force. And awesome. All right. So Alanna, do you want to start and kick us off?
Certainly. Hi, I'm Alanna. I graduated Landmark in '07. I started Landmark in fifth grade, so I was there for fifth to 12, so there for a long time. Um, and I know Spencer from my paths there. But my path after Landmark brought me to college. I kind of started definitely in something that I was my strengths, which is the creative side. I started in interior design and quickly shifted to fashion merchandising. Um, that's where I really discovered that my skill set is and my learning disabilities come in hand, where I'm very much someone who's hands-on. I like the creative and analytical side of things, so kind of grounding that creativity with actual numbers. That's something I do every day with costing all the way to just making sure testing for different products. My journey then continued into apparel. So for the last 10 years, I was in apparel development at New Balance and Asics. And most recently, I've shifted to footwear. I've been at Hey Dude now for 3 years, which has been a great learning opportunity, kind of shifting foundational things I took from apparel into footwear. Um, some of my strengths there are collaborating. I consistently am meeting with designers, my product management group. So I think that is a big aspect of my role, but something that plays again into my um, learning disability. I feel like I am someone that needs to see it, touch it, hear it, be a part of it. So, especially with footwear, I'm able to incorporate that kind of skill set. Um, Other skills that I have that I bring to the table are my seeing patterns. I kind of understand like where things are going and kind of seeing different problems and kind of navigate problem solving from that place. And just kind of being adaptable. Every day is different. But again, going back to foundational things that I know work in my skill set, which is something as simple as setting a timer all the way to product managing my time out, meeting different deadlines. So if that is taking additional time to meet with my designer, setting up time with my manager to set expectations of priorities, things like that.
That's great. So, out of curiosity, Alanna, thinking about kind of the skill set that you have, and you're crunching numbers and you're looking at all these things. Thinking back at your days at Landmark, did you see those strengths? Were you like at the time, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to be really good at this. This is going to be so applicable in my life. Or did you
Uh,
kind of discover that as you got into the job, like, oh, I actually can do this stuff?
yes and no. I think my strengths have always been in the field of art, so I definitely thought I was going to continue further down that path. But I really enjoyed chemistry and math, so I think that does come into hand now into not so much the chemistry part, but the science and mathematical parts of things. So I think, yeah, there were definitely seeds being planted then that definitely brought me to my path.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, Brittany, tell us about you.
All right. Hello, everybody. Hi, I'm Brittany Malloy Kenney. I did not graduate from Landmark, but I did work there for 5 years, for 2018 to 2023. It was part of the 50 Forward campaign, so very exciting. I'm a nonprofit fundraiser. That's what I do for a living. I've been doing that work for 15 years. It's interesting to sort of think about the strengths and weaknesses and how you got into that sort of work. I've always, well, I'll back up and say I am from Oklahoma originally, going to school in the 1990s with an undiagnosed learning disability, sort of this like, you're learning differently, but we don't really know why, and there's no way for us to help you. So I'm so sorry for, for that, lady. You're kind of on your own. Um, and so that was a little bit of a struggle going through school. And I didn't love doing kind of academic stuff, probably for many of the same reasons that sometimes I can struggle at work today. But um, I always was a people person, high levels of empathy, high levels of connection with people, and just being able to read people really, really quickly. And then I also am very passionate about art and education and just all kinds of things. So that's how I ended up in fundraising, because that kind of combines all of those things. And then, the first few years out of college and graduate school were a bit of a struggle. I remember at one point, an employer. I came back from lunch and there was a guide to grammar and spelling like laid out on my desk, which was pretty hard. Like, oh, there's obviously a problem happening here that I wasn't aware of. So that was, sort of kind of microaggressions like that through early career. And then I found Landmark, which truly changed my life in so many different ways. It's the first time I actually participated in a study with Landmark where I had some testing and it was determined you do have dyslexia. So there was finally a name. There was kind of like a empowering moment where I was like, oh, this thing that's always been kind of difficult for me, it is something, and I am in the exact right place right now to be hearing this information. And then at Landmark is really where I started to understand the, kind of really intense positives that come along with thinking differently and having different learning differences. So that was just honestly life-changing. Landmark is my favorite place I've ever worked. I know that, like, I have to say that I'm here, but it's actually quite true. And since then, I think it gave me the confidence in sort of my professional life to just say, like, yep, this is who I am as a person. Yes, I have the working memory of a goldfish, and that is very true. But here's how I compensate for all of this, and here's all the other wonderful things that I bring to the table.
That's great. So I have to say, you are a better person than me in terms of impulse control. If I walked in and somebody had left like a grammar and like those passive aggressive, but I also had such a great example because I think all I know you obviously, but also even if I hadn't, just based on this conversation and just the trajectory of your career, you're an amazing communicator. You know how to
Yeah,
connect with people. You know how to tell a story in a way that helps people see and be inspired by it.
yeah,
And grammar plays the tiniest bit of role in that, right? I mean,
yeah,
it plays a role, but I think that's, again, sometimes in school, we don't always get that bigger picture because we're graded on punctuation and spelling, not really communication.
yeah.
Um, so I think that's, and I wish more employers, understood that.
I do too. I think there's a little bit of a shift this day and age. I think it's becoming more of a topic that is at the top of people's minds. That was a while ago. I'll say that was about 10 years ago. So hopefully that person's progressed and, grown as a human since then. But
Lord. Oh my Lord. Well, that's great. And Brittany, thank you for being here with us tonight.
yeah,
So
thank you for
appreciate
having me.
it. Spencer, would you talk a little bit about your landmark story and
Yeah, of
a career?
course. Of course. Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name's Spencer Smitherman. I'm originally from Shreveport, Louisiana, but moved to Massachusetts to go to Landmark. So very much like Alanna, there, I think I was in the summer program between fourth and fifth grade, and then fifth all the way through. So like 8.5 years, we'll call it. We'll round up, and it was an incredible experience. Like really changed my life for the better. And so many amazing faculty, staff that that really contributed to that, and really amazing outcome for me. And I just am very grateful for the experience I had. After Landmark, I went to college out here, out there in Massachusetts. I'm out in California today, at Bentley University, and then for the past decade, I've been working in Silicon Valley in technology. Today, I run essentially our post-sales organization for a company called Sublime Security, email security. And so, our technical field, our technical support, customer success orgs, look after those folks. And yeah, in terms of executive function and in the workplace, areas where I have some strengths. That, really a lot of the communication, I can kind of identify a lot with what Brittany shared around communication. And you're in Silicon Valley, you're working with a lot of nerds, and so building consensus with a bunch of nerds is kind of my specialty, if you will. And the impulse control, things like that really resonates with me. I found that I have a really hard time managing impulse control if I'm not interested in the topic. But software and building software and working in software is very interesting to me. It's a big puzzle. And so it kind of keeps me engaged. And I think by just virtue of the type of work that I found, that's been really beneficial. And I think I can identify again, Brittany, I feel like we have the same learning style. On the working memory front, I think goldfish might be like, I feel like the right calibration of working memory. I always tell people, if you just speak to me and just tell me your phone number, I'm never going to remember it. You have to write it down. So we'll talk a little bit about maybe some of that, some strategies around that in a bit. And really, frankly, in terms of just how I kind of learn and figure out how to do things, it's just always learning by doing. So draft, quick drafts, iterating on those, whether it's some sort of software project or design spec or plan for a team, whatever needs to be done. Starting with that one small piece, kind of working from first principles, and then kind of building from there. I've always found to be more effective with figuring out bigger puzzles. So yeah.
I love the idea of learning by doing. I think that's and I think that that's probably a lot of what made you successful, is that you get in a situation and you could figure it out, right? And I don't know if you find this way, but I have found there, more traditional learner or somebody that, did really great in school often needs a script of sorts, right? Because that's what brought them success, is being able to like play the game and play it successfully. So I love to hear you talking about that idea of learning by doing, right? Just it didn't work, it didn't work for you the first time anyway. So, you kind of inclined to just figure it out.
Yeah.
And then I also thought it was interesting. So, you mentioned you work with, nerds, and I'm sure they're lovely people, right? They'll make a great deal more money than
I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd too. So, it's,
But you also find though,
with
because you have this kind of proclivity or ability to communicate, that might be something that while they have a technical know-how, that may not be their strength, right? And you find that you could kind of come supplement this kind of more technical textbook skill with this more kind of life skill. That makes it right. Good. Yeah. That's like, I think again, when we think about the workforce, it's often the skills that aren't necessarily measured on a report card that are the most important and the distinctive. So yeah, and not for now, but I totally forgot. I'm going to Shreveport on Monday. Totally forgot about the Shreveport connection. We got to connect after this.
All right, we got to talk about Shreveport. All right, excellent.
I've never been, so
if you love gambling, humidity, and crime, you'll love Shreveport. So.
That's why it's on my list. That's why it's on my list. All right, Addie. Addie, tell us about you and your story and where you are at today and your navigation through the workforce.
Sure. Hey, so I'm Addie. I was in Landmark for 4 years just for high school. I got there. I came from India directly, so that was my first time in America, starting at Landmark in boarding school at the age of 13. So it was a lot of change for me to begin with. And then in Landmark, I really discovered a lot of things about myself, things I'm interested in outside of just academics, and especially in academics as well. Going into graduating from Landmark with a very strong interest in the science side of things, but also a very big background in art and creativity. It's kind of similar to how Spencer and Alanna combined, how she went to the creative side, which was my background. I was in portfolio coming from Landmark, and then also having a really strong interest in pursuing science, like becoming an engineer. So my only path forward was to go do engineering, and I became a civil engineer and architectural engineer. When I did that, I was again in a space where I was like, I don't know what to do, because I can become a designer, or I could become somebody who manages projects, or I could go become somebody who's just doing the calculations in the background. But I think I had the opportunity in college to do different internships and co-ops, and I was able to figure out that I want to be a project manager who kind of fills in the gaps in all those different roles. And I did that by actually filling all those different roles in different phases of my life. But now I work as a project manager, and I'm working with executive function is like a companion for me in everyday life. It's simultaneously handling about currently 11 projects, and being able to wear all different hats while managing those projects has been the kind of the everyday learning, okay, I need to switch gears from being a drafter today, or working with my drafter today, to talking with my client about budget and about negotiations, or going on site and talking to my site personnel and explaining like, no, we can't install that way. We need to install it this way. And just changing, being organized, because I'm the one who's accountable for all of these people. And I'm the one who's responsible for the tasks they give me and I give them um, back as well. So kind of trying to navigate through that at an everyday basis is how I deal with executive function. But the challenges sometimes I face with it is, I mean, I'll give you an example. Sometimes I'm about 30% on the job site, 70% in the office. And sometimes I'll be driving to the job and I'll be on the phone with my client or my superintendent, and I'll forget, and I'm on autopilot. I forget to switch that gear in my head, and I drive myself home when I'm supposed to go to the project. So that's like one of the challenges I face sometimes. And but things that are my strengths here is like I'm mentally just very detail oriented. I have a very, it's almost like an OCD of how organized I need to be, but that's something I decide to do personally for my everyday task, and I've seen how beneficial that is for me and how it helps with my executive function. So those are kind of my strengths that I use, and of course, I implement different strategies in everyday life to help myself with it, but that's kind of been my journey with it so far.
So first of all, I had no idea that you came from India to Landmark. That alone, I'm fascinating. And talk about a journey and like figuring life out. That's incredible. And so I think it's also interesting listening to your story out of curiosity and your day, right? I'm doing this and then I'm doing that and da da.
Yeah.
If you had to do like a whole day of just with the draftman or a whole day, do you find you would actually have poorer performance and that you thrive off the variety?
That's a great question. And I actually, there are days when I would need to do that, but I feel like not only that I thrive off the variety, I like the variety. I enjoy it because when I was a drafter, I worked as a drafter for 6 months, and I worked as an architectural assistant for 6 months, and it became a little too mundane for me just doing that all the time. As important as it was, and as exciting as the next day could be, with the different challenges you face, I realized that I'm more interested on the holistic view of things, and maybe it's the artist side of me, but I want to see my artwork on the largest scale possible, right? So um, being cornered into being one gear was not for me. But as important as that is, like, because I appreciate all those different individuals that I work with on an everyday basis, but I feel like I thrive off of the diversity, and I I like it.
Good, yeah. No, and that makes I'm very similar, and I think that sometimes a misnomer around executive function that people think, well, if you're somebody that might struggle or have a difficult time with executive function, you could never be a project manager or you could never be an executive. And I actually think, obviously, that's not true, but I think the variety and the amount of balls in the air often is where someone thrives. Like I personally, as a head of school, there's 10,000 things going on, and I like that. If I have one thing going on, it's never going to get done. And I'm going to, procrastinate. I'm going to forget. But if I have 10,000 things, I'm just so much more engaged. Um,
Right.
so before we move on, Addie, I have to ask, knowing that you're an artist and there's all this beautiful artwork behind you, is that your artwork?
Yeah, the ones you see, I think they are all mine. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love the picture of the kind of yellow hat. And anyway, it's beautiful. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you so
Very cool.
much.
Very cool. All right, well, thank you all for those introductions. That was super helpful. And again, I think there's already a lot of similarities and yet also so much variety, which I think is really cool. So I'm gonna throw a question out there. Anyone can jump in. Everyone can answer. A few of you can answer. If it speaks to you, please just jump in. And I'm curious, because we're all at different varying stages of our career. Did you find when you first got into your career, there was this kind of learning curve of like, oh, like I got to figure this out, right? I think we've all now availed ourselves to have strategies, which we'll talk more about in a moment, and tools. But was there a point earlier in your career where you're like, oh, this is just not working and I got to figure something out? Was there kind of this yeah, it's kind of awakening of, I got to do something different.
I can answer. Well, I'm going to give an example of like before I started my career when I was a waiter, when I was a server, and I was trying to fit in with everybody, and like people would just take the orders and they would remember in their head and go away, and I was like, oh my God, I cannot do that. And I guess that kind of translates into the professional office space where, you're in a meeting, you're supposed to be retaining the information. I can't just sit and listen and retain it all. I have to be writing it down. And that's a learning curve. That took me a little while to realize like I was going to have to do that. And also that it specifically had to be writing. I couldn't bring my laptop in and take notes. That wasn't going to work for me. So there's a lot of kind of trial and error type of stuff for me in the beginning. And then
And
of course, rereading emails to not have those spelling and grammatical errors.
Grammarly. All over. AI will just do it. And Brittany, to this day, right now, you're well into your career. Do you still write everything down? Is that still like a strategy?
I do. Yeah. In fact, I'm taking a trip tomorrow and I brought my little moleskin notebook because I'm going to be writing things down. Yeah, that's the way my brain retains the information best.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Anybody else? Any kind of that like early career, like, oh, wow.
Mine wasn't so much like even like an executive function thing, and more of just like it just was just not the right job for me.
Mm.
I had like a outbound cold calling sales style role, and was at that job for like a year and was effectively fired. I mean, I didn't do very well. Got laid off, but it was like a trim the fat type of layoff. And so finding what you enjoy, and what I enjoyed was really the thing that like helped me probably the most in my career, outside of just like some of these general strategies. I feel like that has helped me deal with a lot of the other like complexities of my learning disability, relative to to the work I'm doing. So yeah, that was it for me. I don't think there was like a single turning point per se. I knew I always needed the strategy. So I'd been a Landmark for so long. I've been using strategies for so long. It's just a different context. You're kind of employing them now.
Yeah. And I think that's such a good point. I'm glad you shared that because I think, especially for any parents that might be listening, and I'm a parent of two dyslexic kids, right? So we tend to have this, obviously we love our kids. We're so proud of our kids. We're amazed by our kids. And then we're so worried about our kids. We're all worried about our kids, but then we're even extra worried about our kids, right? Because, what if all these things? And then so often I think we forget that a lot of people, dyslexic or not, go through early career shifts. Very few people stay in the same job or even field as they start. But we tend to forget that, right? We don't normalize that. And as parents of kids who learn differently, sometimes we overanalyze it and think, oh, it must mean this. Or we ourselves who might have experienced school failure, when our initial kind of career path doesn't take the route that we think, we internalize it. It's because of all these things that are wrong with us. But yeah, it's totally normal. My first job out of school is I worked for a self-publisher. So people like paid to have their books published. It was awful. It was absolutely, the books were awful and the job was awful. And I don't know why I didn't get fired. I have no idea why I didn't get fired. I should have gotten fired. But again, it helped me understand that I did not want to do that. Yeah. So I would love to hear from everybody. And Alanna, maybe we could start with you. In your job, in your field right now, do you have any like go-to tools, resources that daily basis, frequently, project based? What are some things that you incorporate that you have found to just be so helpful to you?
Sure. I think you already hit one of them. Grammarly is my go-to, especially if I don't have a friend nearby to proofread my work. Other tools at work, especially, we use PowerPoint and just Illustrator just to have images and products all along. And I find that when we put all the information in one place, that's where my strength is, because like everyone probably here, I need to like see it all in totality to understand like, okay, what is it looking like, the cost, the material, what factory it's at. So having resources like that. Another tool we have in work it's called a PLM, so it's a product line management system. So that's where a lot of our data lives there. And my current role and at Hey Dude, we're really getting that up to speed. Previous employers have, it's a little bit more well-oiled machines, but what I'm learning, and this is where my learning disability comes into play as well, is when it's all in the system, I work perfectly. Like I have everything, my checks and balances. I can track my projects in there. Anytime I have to move out of the system, that's where things can get a little wonky, and I have to really hone in on my other skills I've built up. OneNote is a Microsoft Office program. I don't know if you guys still do two-column notes at Lyric, but
We die. Yes.
okay. That's something that the way that the program's set up is kind of similar. So like my tabs all have, if it's like fitting on this day, I have all my fitting notes of those projects. So again, it kind of is my main topic and then all of the details that need to go into it. So I do kind of toggle from notebook to online, but I am finding more strengths with things online because again, then I can centralize it and then export it into an Excel or vice versa. So yeah, so those are some of my tricks. Another thing is like my calendar. I block off time just to like hone in on certain projects. If it is, again, costing keeps coming to mind because I just did costing for the past week. So blocking off time to make sure I'm allocating my time appropriately. And then having regular touch bases with my manager, again, setting expectations of something I learned from a previous manager slash mentor was my big three. So one of my big projects or three priorities for the week. And when I used to go to her, I'd have like this whole list. And she's like, this is great, but what are your top ones from this based on like the calendar, et cetera, et cetera. So, and she's like, let's be realistic. You can't do all of this in a week. So setting the expectation that your big three have to happen, like that's mandatory. So kind of continuing that practice into life and at work has really made a difference of what are my top priorities, and everything else is added bonus or can float to the following week. So
I love the top three. I love that. That's
yeah,
great. I also am going to play this at the next assembly so every Landmark student hears that you are at Hey Dude successfully using two-column notes. That is going to be used over and over again. So that's that's great. And it's interesting here because I it resonates with me. When it's in the system, it's beautiful. When it's out of the system, it's challenging. I have a really hard time like getting in the system. So for about 6 months, I have like every day, I'm gonna use money.com. I'm gonna do it. I paid for it. And I know if it was in there, I would use it, but the actual like taking the time to get myself organized within it is almost like insurmountable to me. So anyway, that's I resonates, but I really love that big three. I'll also use that. And again, it has nothing even to do with being dyslexic. That's just all of our jobs are overwhelming, right?
yeah, it's just a great life tip in general. But yes, my big three is something I walk into the week with. So
I love it. I love it. Addie, what about you? Like, you're a project manager, right? So this is what you do all day, every day. Are there any go-tos that you have?
Yeah, I think similar to Alanna, I use a lot of the Microsoft tools, such as OneNote, Teams, but I think for somebody in my role, I think the top three things that I have to focus on a daily basis is communication, organization, and time management. For reasons because a project manager is pretty much filling in the gaps between every entity on a project, and I need to make sure I can communicate from one to the other in a way. So, for example, how Spencer said earlier, like he's dealing with nerds a lot. I have to deal with nerds too, but then I have to completely change my vernacular to somebody who's not a nerd, somebody who's a client who's just paying for things, and be able to explain that jargon to the other person. So for me to do that, I use one of the most important tools for communication. I use is Grammarly, of course, but also like AI generators like ChatGPT. Every time I'm writing an email, I know it's going to be full of spelling errors and grammar mistakes, tenses, and so I write my word jumble up and then I just copy paste that into ChatGPT with a prompt like, hey, I'm trying to write to this person. Please can you professionalize and can make this concise? and it spits out everything I wanted to say in a concise way. And I'm like, why couldn't I think of that? And then I realized I have I need to keep all these things in my brain. It's not easy to just organize that in my head. So I have these external strategies to use. So that's something for communication I use. For organization, I think I can't emphasize it enough how much I live in my email. So using the email organization tool that there is, just separating my projects into different folders, having subfolders for that, like, okay, client emails go here, my engineers' emails go here, my boss's emails go here, and the unimportant ones that I don't need to look at now go here, because I have time blocked out for each of these as well, which brings me to my third point, which is a time management, and for what I use, like the calendar, like Outlook calendar, which is integrated with your Apple calendar the most. Like those are the, like blocking those times out and organizing my site visits or my meetings, and from that to like everyday tasks I need to do, like I'll put every single thing in my calendar because my mind won't be able to keep track of it without it. And I'll need those reminders that comes from my phone. Like uh, I say this likely, but I just got this thing and I can't, like, this is the best thing for me because it reminds me like, oh, I should be at a meeting right now, like I gotta go. I have an executive functioning thing I gotta talk to Josh about. So, it's stuff like that reminds me. So tools like that is what I use at work. That answers your question.
No, that's so great. That's so great. And it's I love that Apple Watch. It's funny because I just everyone makes fun of me, but like the last 6 weeks, I got the new Meta Ray-Ban AI glasses because I'm obsessed with AI. And I thought like it's so great because it'll remind you, like it'll just like and it constantly is just like I'm in a meeting and it's like you are supposed to be, and I like get freaked out. And anyway, so it's delicate balance, right? Of what works and what doesn't. Also interesting as you talk about kind of your email structure, right? And how you have it like all very deliberately, folded out. So funny because I was just working at Landmark every year with a biannual publication, The Lantern. And we just are putting out in the next few weeks the edition of our magazine, The Lantern, all about executive function. And I had to write a little blurb about it. But it's funny because I wrote about how I can't use folders. I get overwhelmed by them all, the whole thing. But if it wasn't for like the search function of Gmail, because I could hold on to what someone said or the intent or the keyword of an email and I can find it. But if I have to like make a decision in that working memory, like where should I put this? I will overthink it and be crippled. So funny. So again, it's not about right way, wrong way. It's about what works for you and like just being aware of what works for you, right? I think that's such an
I,
important part of this.
I completely agree, and it's so funny that you say that because I have this war with my colleague who sits next to me, and he uses the same tool, but he uses it to a very extreme way. Like he'll make folders within a folder within a folder with a folder at a point where it's impossible to him to remember where he saved a certain thing, and he can't process, like you just said, like trying to process in that split second, where do I place this? So that's where I try to explain to him, like the search function is incredible. Like you can keep it broad and just store it like in a broad way, and then using that search function is an incredible tool. I agree with you.
That's awesome. Awesome. Spencer, in doing what you do in Silicon Valley and tech, is anything you're into? Like, is there anything that we haven't mentioned that like is super helpful to you?
Yeah, yeah. So apologies for some of the connection. Kept dropping for a second. But one of the things that's been really helpful for me is like the normalization of recording calls all the time, as well as like kind of AI transcription feature sets. In general, I kind of waffled back and forth on the how to use those. Historically, I've always taken very, very copious notes. I think Alexander in the chat had a good question around, how you kind of manage the goldfish working memory problem. And, taking copious notes is the solution to that. When you hear something on a call, you take a note about it. Originally, I took notes a ton. But now with call recordings, I take less of them because you can go back and watch the recording. But at the same time, if you don't take notes on the call, I tend to retain less on the first go around. And taking notes and taking the time to pause between questions and between conversation topics helps you kind of control the pacing of the call. And I find that very effective when you're negotiating on a call or trying to work on a deal with someone. there's a lot of desire to try and fill the silence, right? In a lot of cases, and so you can turn some of these, kind of I'll call it crutch, into a strength in a lot of cases if you're doing it right. The other way I think about this too is like, think about the opposite of all the things we're talking about. We're talking about, being productive and things that kind of push that productivity. Well, what are the things that draw productivity away from you? And so one of the things I do is I turn off pretty much all notifications on all my phones. So I don't get, if I don't have your number, you can't call me. It doesn't ring on my phone. It just goes to voicemail. Text messages don't send notifications. Slack messages don't send notifications. I basically silence everything, and I just instinctively go check them on a regular basis during the workday. That helps me immensely. I mean, I would always be distracted, getting pings and text messages and whatever is going on in the digital world. So silencing everything and just going back, just going, hey, every half hour you're going to check Slack or whatever as you have time. That tends to be really effective for me.
That's and again, that's such a, in the grand simple thing, right? Just literally like giving yourself permission to silence your phone, put, do not disturb on, and what that can do, right? That just the impact that can have is huge. And it's also interesting too, the normalization, right, of recording calls and all that. And I completely agree. And that's I also find to be this really, to being able to go back and reference a conversation, I find super helpful. And what I've also started to do, especially with AI, is, we're doing some construction projects at school right now. I have all kinds of things going on, and we'll get these like huge proposals, and I'm so over my head, and I'm like, what are you doing? So I will give it to AI before I read it and just say, give me the main points, and what are things that might be of concern or out of scope or whatever it is, and then I'll read it, and then I'm like, okay, I have so much more cognitive flexibility or space now because I have a background, right? So to your point, and Brittany, I'm going to come to you next on this. Somebody in the chat had asked about, like, well, with that whole goldfish processing space, how do you kind of control or monitor the amount of time it takes you to get through a process? And that's, again, one of the things I do, right, is I will pre-read, right, and that AI will tell me some things I need to look for. And again, I still do the reading because otherwise I won't have an in-depth enough understanding. But I'm not there trying to like piece everything together because I have a framework in which to attack it. Brittany, what about you? Like, so, in your day, you have to write letters, you have to meet with people, you have to craft strategy and narrative. I'm sure that there are times where there are looming deadlines. How do you kind of manage that?
Oh my God, I feel like you guys had all these cool examples, and I'm gonna be like the old granny from like the 1800s with my like paper and pen. I do bullet journaling. This is actually a skill I learned at Landmark School from the great Michelle Grenice. I started here, and I was like, I like to write things down, and she said, there's actually a method for pen to paper note taking that really, gets you organized and helps you keep on throughout your day. So on a Monday morning, I sit down. The first part that I do is I sync up my electronic calendar, and I write everything down so that then it's just the muscle memory of like, this is what I'm doing this week. Then you go back through and you look at your notes from last week, any unfinished projects, you move up to this week, you write that down. And then anything that you need to be working on this week or any prep you need to do for the meetings coming up, you write that down. And then you have sections for the notes that you're going to have throughout the week. And then you go back and reference through. So it's sort of like, I mean, it really is like journaling, but for the professional space. And yeah, it's sort of prioritizing also, I kind of like lay out all of my tasks, just a big brain dump, and then I'll kind of put like bullet journaling's really silly, and you can put like a little like asterisk next to like, this is the most important thing, do this first, it's a star. So I do that sort of thing, and there's a lot of satisfaction with getting to kind of check things off of the list, and then the arrows to move it over. So that's sort of my old person thing that I do, but it really works for me. I found it, 7 years ago at this point, and it's my tried and true. Other things I do, I really liked, Eddie, your organization of emails. That's exactly how I am at work also. If I have an email in my inbox, it has to be read and then put away, or else I get very nervous. But Josh, I am you in my personal life, and I have like 18,000 emails in my inbox. So that's kind of, yeah, there's always a balance in life, right? And then Alanna, I'm with, like you, also with agendas. So I do a lot of team management now. I do work, but I also manage teams, and I am a talker and I like to connect with people. So those meetings can go awry really quickly. So I always, we have agendas for every single meeting, and I like to start them out with sort of that human element so I can get that piece of me figured out. And we always do, each team member and I do something we're proud of from the week before and something that was challenging the week before. So it kind of gives us our highs and lows in a different way of kind of framing that. And then the challenging piece, then we can walk through together, why was that challenging? What can we do better next time? And then we also do a similar top, like big three. We do big five. Maybe I should move it to three, give them a little bit more, like a little more space to get those three things done. But that's really important, I think. And then to bring things over, like follow-up tasks from the last week, the consistency of the follow through. And that's sort of it. I'm just a basic lady who uses Excel spreadsheets and all that kind of stuff. But I found for myself, color coding works magic. I have to color code stuff. Even today, I made a personal budget for my family and I color coded every single bit of it. That's just how my brain wants to recognize it and remembers it best.
So, first of all, there's nothing basic about you, Brittany. So don't tell you're so short. No, so I love that. I love that. And I think it's interesting that the bullet journaling works so well for you. That would be awful for me because I would like overthink the rules and then I would just get anxious. And I think that's the other interesting part about hearing all of you share your stories is it's not about the tool, it's about knowing yourself. Right. I think that's and I feel that way, especially, and this is going to lead into my next question for you all. And the time that we have left is that the piece of advice that you would give yourself, like if you were going back to first year of your career, what piece of advice would you go back and give yourself? And to me, I for a long time struggled to try to be organized or operate in the way that I thought it was supposed to be done or that other people did it. And like my inability to conform to a certain tool was my fault. That was a character or a kind of whatever productivity flaw in myself versus trying to like spend the time to understand like what do I need and how can I go get that and use that. That was so anyway, it's been fascinating to hear the kind of just the diversity of problem solving and solutioning that we all have. But I'd love to hear, like, because again, we only have a few minutes left. Everybody's, advice to the younger you, Brittany, because you're here. Do you want to go, young?
It's
sweet-
very. I mean, as you heard, I had an incident when I was a younger me. I think just growing as a person and as a professional and realizing, like, yes, there are things that are much more challenging for me than there are for other people, but in the balance of life, I have so many wonderful attributes that I'm contributing to teams that my colleagues are not. So valuing those kind of intrinsic things that are not spelling and grammar and all of that stuff, I think I would go back and tell myself that those are valuable qualities and assets to have, and that I should be proud of those and to really like own all of that, own all of yourself, and don't be embarrassed that you can't spell the word convenient or whatever.
It's not convenient. There's nothing convenient about it to begin with, right? No, I so appreciate that. And I think too, and it sounds like you feel this way too. I wasn't very good at school, so I brought a lot of like baggage and self-consciousness. And when I wasn't good at something and other people were, I forget that they're bad at other things, right? They're not nice. They're jerks, right?
Right.
And that's a harder thing to improve. So I very much appreciate that. Addie, what about you? What would you go back and say to yourself?
I guess so from somebody to a younger self, I would go back and say that the industry that I'm in, especially considering that when I was getting into the professional side of things, and I would say it's okay to speak up about the problems you're having, because coming from Landmark, you feel like you know, you have your neurodiversity and you go out there, but you might not find a lot of people like you, and you can't speak up about your problems that easily. But more you go out there and the more you speak up, you realize that regardless of your neurodiversity, a lot of other people are struggling with very similar problems. Maybe because they have similar neurodiversities as well, but they just don't know about it. But point being that they are also struggling. And maybe they found strategies that help them, and those strategies could help you. A lot of the strategies that I use in my everyday life, I've learned from a lot of other people. And it took me to talk about the problems I was having to get the strategies that I need now that I know that I need to continue working the way I want to work or function or executive function. So I think that's the advice I would give. Like, don't be afraid to speak up, because especially in an industry like construction, it can be easy to get bogged down by or get intimidated by people around you who might speak differently or speak in a certain vernacular that you're not used to, but you're trying to learn. It's okay to speak up and be like, I don't know what that means. I don't know how to do that. Can you explain that? I know you're a big dude who's like really serious about something and very intense for some reason. I don't know why, but can you help me explain that a little slower? And that's okay. They laugh and they'll help you understand, because all they want to do is make sure the work goes well. And if that means they have to spend an extra few minutes explaining something or helping you, they will do that. There are a lot of helpful people out there, even if it's an intimidating industry.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. And at the end of the day, their success is dependent on your success, right? So there's this
Mm.
mutual investment in one another. I think that's so great. And I also like you brought up a great point too, that you know, like Brittany and I, as an example, we didn't go to a landmark. We didn't have a narrative when we went into the workforce of, you know, that there are people that work this way and think that way. And so not only can you all find others to be resources, just you and your journey and your kind of self-awareness is a resource to people who don't even know they need that resource, right? They're just again internalizing and all that. So appreciate
Yep.
that. Spencer, what about you? What would you go back and say?
I'd probably tell myself to work harder. It's a little blunt, but I feel like when I was in college, I kind of lost some of my work ethic. I feel like kind of like figure out, you know what kind of questions are gonna be asked on the test. You can kind of like hack your way through a college course. I got really good at it by the end of the 4 years. And when you're in a workplace, you know, knowledge compounds, and you know, learning compounds, and as you're reading new material and trying to figure out why a business works the way it does, or whatever you're trying to do in your work, it's really hard to replace just working really hard at something. Whether that's spending a little time on the weekend working on something, or you know, spending some time in the evening working on something. It just really, you know, I feel like that's what's helped me a lot in my career, especially my learning disability, is being able to extract that a little extra effort, and produce better results and a better work product. So I would have told myself that. I probably wouldn't have listened.
Exactly. Like, whatever. You're so old. No, but I love that too, because I also think, you know, for anybody, not just, you know, LD folks, but what it means to work hard and the feedback and recognition you get in the workforce is so different than in school, right? There's no test, there's no exam, there's no midterm grade, right? You may not, you know, get that kind of whether or not you're on the right track for weeks or months, but it's not mean you have to keep working harder and harder, right? So I think that's a really great point. All right, Alanna, take us home. What would you say to yourself?
Similar to what you kind of said too, I think not following the mold of what other people where they're finding success and recognizing that that model might not work for me. I think kind of on the flip, Spencer, I went into college really like self-advocating and really keeping my landmark, like that power there. And then when I got into the workforce, I think that's where it really hit me hard of kind of feeling like I had to wear a mask and kind of follow suit and learn that way and kind of shutting down in certain aspects at the beginning of my career of feeling like how can I fit in? And like can I learn and catch up to everybody else? But I think once I found the right organization and the right people and having trust in my counterparts that I can be transparent with my managers, that's where I really found my stride and my confidence to apply things that work for me and maybe going against the grain of what is normal for everybody else. But it's funny, once I feel like I start to like shine my LD light, it's like magnets, like everyone, you just find your people. So I have a few coworkers at Hey Dude that we have bonded over that we're all LD. Some have found out later in life as well. So it's great having those connections, but also the transparency with, again, my designer who I work closely with. Kind of feeding off both of our strengths and weaknesses. So
That's great. And I love you finding the confidence to kind of go your own way, go against the grain if it doesn't have to. And ultimately, that's what an employer wants. An employer doesn't want somebody like that's not how you excel or you grow in your career is by doing it exactly as expected, because nothing stands out about that. You are meeting the expectation. But if you want to grow and you want to, you need to exceed expectation, right? And so you have to find a way to do that. So I think that's great. We are so close to time. We had first I want to say hi to Robert Liddy. Robert's an alum of Landmark, I think from the 70s, who often comes to these things. So Robert, thank you for joining us. And we had a question on here that I'm happy to kind of quickly address, and I see it a lot, and I both personally and professionally. Sometimes we work as educators with parents who have their own kind of executive functioning difficulties. And so how do you as an educator help support them to support their child? Because often, what happens, they kind of bring their own challenges and then kind of bring those to their child because, they're not, helping them be successful in all those things. It's a whole, obviously a great question, a complicated one, and a very simple strategy or simple sense. I always try to help parents think about, don't try to solve the problem, try to create a system, right? So instead of saying, how do I make sure that they're ready in the morning? That's more symbolic or symptomatic of a larger system. How do we put a system together so everybody knows the routine and what's expected of them when? Versus like, how do I make sure that they have their shoes on when we're ready to get in the car, right? Because that often in my house results in me yelling and saying, why don't you have your damn shoes on? It's time to go. Versus a system that would, facilitate everyone being prepared and knowing those things. So a very simplified answer to a very complex question. So I hope that's somewhat helpful. So great. Thank you, everybody, so much for taking the time and being with us tonight. We hope you found this helpful. I'm going to cheat and look at my notes real quick. Reminder that we have 2 more of our Landmark Learns webinars coming up: Executive Function at Home, Executive Function for School, and also be sure to check out our webinars through Landmark Outreach. And then final plug, for those that might find it helpful, we have a Skills Plus summer program. So we have a summer program for students for high school and middle school students that focuses specifically on executive function skills at school. And that's in July 14th to the 25th. It's a half-day program. You can go to landmarkschool.org to find out more about it for that Skills Plus program. So again, thank you all so much for being here. Addie, real quick, as the most recent Landmark grad, no pressure, should Landmark have a snow day tomorrow? It's the
Oh
question
man.
of the hour. Buddy, it's all on you.
Wow. Yes.
Okay. All right. I am
Oh,
absolved. That is delegation, ladies and gentlemen.
I was nervous. I was nervous he'd say the wrong answer.
Oh man. Snow day all the way.
Well, it looks like Beverly just caved, so it makes it a whole lot easier, I think. All right. Again, everybody, thank you so much for the time. Alanna, Addie, Spencer, Brittany, this was awesome. Thank you all so much. And everyone who joined us, thanks. Have a great night. And take care.